after what happened to my family, I left to go to the United States for about 13 years. And then I came back right after my college graduation. And it was my first time back in Taiwan for so long. And I didn't quite know how to face what everybody was thinking of me. I mean, there would be people who would meet me on the street, and when they would know who I was, they would start crying. And so I could sense that the Taiwanese people had a lot of sympathy and had carried my story in their hearts for a long time. And it was hard for me to know how to handle people crying when they saw me, and yeah, it took a while for me to be able to face that. And then I became then I felt like I needed to be able to tell them that actually I was okay, and that I had by God's grace been able to forgive the person who had done so much damage to so much hurt to my family, and that it kind of became my my hope that people could find hope in the fact that I've been able to forgive. And I also just but I really need to say that forgiveness is really independent of whatever the person did, independent of the offender, meaning that was something that God did in my heart, that I was able to forgive and not be bitter anymore. But I don't think that reconciliation can happen unless the offending party admits wrong and comes and asks for forgiveness, which which I had a really good humbling experience one day after I gave a concert in Hsinchu. When I came home, this lady called me up on the phone, and she just started crying, and she was saying that she's a Waishan, and her family has been in Taiwan for a couple generations, and that when she found out about Taiwan history and what has happened, she felt very sorry, and she was very diligent about teaching her own kids about the reality of Taiwan history and all the hurts that have been done to the Taiwanese people. And she called and she said, she just really wanted to apologize for the things that her parents' generation before had done to hurt my family and the people of Taiwan. And when I heard her talk, I felt very, very humble, and I didn't know how to respond at the time, but now I know that's where reconciliation begins, because I can have a good relationship with this lady, and even though she's a Waishan, and even though she admits to her forefathers having done so much hurt to Taiwan, but she's on the reality plane with me, and she and I can I feel like that's where reconciliation and unity can happen when you're on that kind of a relationship. And I know we're all for everybody getting along and having a peaceful nation here, but I have to say, though, there are a lot of things that needs to be cleared up before that can take place. Meaning a lot of wrongs or inaccuracies or things that our wrong needs to be put right. So for example, I just want to point out that at the time of the murders in my family, since I was the sole witness, of course, everybody's interested in whether or not I saw the murderer's face and if I recognized who it was or whatever, anything that I could give them. And back at that time, the media was completely controlled by the government. There was no free press. And the media back then reported that I said that the guy was some bearded guy, which I did not say. I just want to go on record saying I did not say that. But the government had put out at that time this false lead because they wanted to throw the attention away from them. There was some foreigner guy living in our apartment. They wanted to make everybody who would believe the press that, some guy like that who did that, instead of coming to the logical conclusion that this was a political assassination. Which, again, I have to emphasize that at the time our house was under constant police surveillance, and so whatever, there was no way that anybody could have gotten in unless it was a political assassination. But what's interesting is that in these 20 years, people still are thinking about that bearded man, that false lead that the media put forth back then. And even in 2003, when I gave an interview, they put on the front page of this magazine, a newspaper magazine, that I still had said something about the bearded man, which again, 20 years later, I did not say that, although they reported Lin Huanjun 说, Judy said something about this bearded murder. And so it's incredible that 20 years later, media is still doing the same thing. But I bring up this story because, that was one of my first interviews I gave when I came back to Taiwan. And it was very disheartening to have somebody completely report me saying something I didn't say. But eventually we dropped that issue, and although I prayed about it, and one day, recently when I was walking my kids out, the reporter that did my story came running up to me, and she had recognized me. She came and she said it'd been on her mind and on her heart for a long time, that she kept wanting to find me and just say that she was sorry. And she said, she could not shirk herself of any wrongdoing because she knows that she did wrong. And she said that she just really wanted to ask for my forgiveness for her having allowed the press, their company, to again misrepresent me. And so, so I told her, yeah, I did forgive her, and that she didn't have to worry about it anymore, and that she can just leave it be. And so I just, things are still happening even today that it's amazing that they will still not print and not represent what is true and right. And I think what ideally would be good for things like this to happen would be for to go beyond what she did, which is ask me for forgiveness, but for media in general, or anyone, to be able to come out and say, yes, we did misrepresent, or we did what was wrong, and we need to start on a good foundation of truth.
Well, I grew up, I was born in South Korea, and I lived there when I was a child in 1980 during the Gwangju incident, which some people compare to the Kaohsiung incident in 1979. And at that time in Korea, there was also a military dictatorship, and the people had been protesting for human rights in Kaohsiung, and there was a major crackdown. Sorry, not in Kaohsiung, in Gwangju. Should I say that again?
It's okay. You can start your sentence or your thought over.
Okay. And the people were protesting human rights and wanting for democracy in Gwangju, but there was a major crackdown by the military, similar to the incident in Kaohsiung. And at that time, again, all the news or the information was covered up by the government in Korea. And I think these kind of situations, just by human nature, people sometimes will do wrong things, and they happen all over the world. And just from that, I really think one really important thing is that people be committed to truth. They need to be committed to acknowledging exactly what has happened and not try to use propaganda or try to cover things up. I think that's, if you're committed to truth, no matter if it hurts your side or your position, you'll come out better in the end. And if you're committed to truth, I think that you'll be able to work with the people who are taking the other side of the political side. I never had much understanding or idea about Taiwan until I met my wife-to-be Judy, and then, of course, began to investigate her native land. And I realized something, that all the travel guides and things that had been put out during the time the KMT was a military regime under martial law, that had gotten into the American travel guides, had this very rosy picture about Taiwan being this wonderful democracy at that time. And right now, that would be perfectly correct. Taiwan is a really wonderful democracy, but back then it wasn't true. It was still a military dictatorship. And after having read those kind of descriptions of Taiwan, and then finding out more of the real history, it made me a little bit upset, because I really thought that the truth is really important. And I'm very happy to see that Taiwan is moving towards embracing all parts of its past and acknowledging everything that has gone on, although I know there's still many questions and difficulties and political division. But I think if you want to march forward as a country, as a unified country, and not just break apart, there has to be this commitment to truth, even if it doesn't help your side, or if it puts your own side in a bad account. It's truth is more important. And I guess kind of along with that is what my wife has talked about a lot, is just forgiveness for other people. Because this world has just so many things that are wrong in it, and people hurt other people all the time, that you're never going to get beyond it if you cannot forgive and be free of some wrong that some other person has done to you. I really love studying history, and especially movements of different people groups and their interactions. And so Taiwan was a wonderful place to get to know, because you have all the different Yuanjuming tribal groups that have been here a long time, and then a movement of the Hakka and the Hotlo Taiwanese who came, and then later immigrants from China in the 20th century. And one thing, for me, reading Taiwanese history, the really interesting thing is, for a long time, Taiwan was able to be dominated by outside powers because, whether it be the Japanese or other powers, because the inhabitants were not unified. When there were just the Aboriginal tribes, they could not keep from being controlled by the Dutch or later the Qing dynasty, because all the different tribes fought among each other. And I also read about how the Hakka used to have wars with the Holo, or how even different clans, even within the same ethnic group, had different feuds and wars. And it created a disunity which was able to be exploited by some unified outside power. And I think just looking at Taiwan today, that same thing could play out. I think that one of the most important things is to be able to join together and have Taiwan as a greater goal, to be able to cover up, to overcome the differences each different group has in looking at their past and what they feel like the other group has done to them. Because today it's a new generation, it's different people, you know. What the grandparents or the parents did 20 or 30 or 50 years ago is a different thing from what the people you grew up with and you went to school with and interacted with all your life. And it's a very different time with democracy in it. So I think there's hope for people to be able to be unified now, where there wasn't in the past. I've been curious about the different titles people in Taiwan use to describe each other, talking about Waishan outside the province, or Taiwanese, and then sometimes when they say Taiwanese, they mean Hakka, or they mean the Holo ethnic Taiwanese from Fujian province. And then where does that leave the tribal groups who you could call Taiwanese too? So I was thinking maybe the titles need to be changed. Everyone who's, just like in America, we come from many different places, and for me, I have Scottish, Irish ancestry, and also Comanche, American Indian ancestry. But I'm just called an American, and maybe the word Taiwanese should begin to be used to refer to everybody who's born and lived and is part of this island nation. And I think that might help overcome some of the attitudes. I know a second generation Chinese immigrant. He would be called a Waishan, but he also is able to speak pretty good Taiwanese or Hokkien dialect. Why? Because he grew up and went to school with a bunch of friends who were Taiwanese, and so when they'd play in the streets and hang out together, they'd use a lot of Taiwanese words, and he learned them himself. And now he's become as much a part of Taiwan as those who have lived here for 300 or 400 years. Just like in America, whether you're a second generation or first generation immigrant from some country, like Arnold Schwarzenegger is a first generation immigrant from Austria, and he's now the governor of California. I think in Taiwan it would be really helpful to be able to embrace whoever it is that wants to count Taiwan as their homeland and their native land, no matter if they've came here in their lifetime, or if their parents' generation came here, or if they came here 300 years ago or 5,000 years ago. I think it would be really helpful for everyone to be able to embrace each other as Taiwanese if you hold that common identity as, yes, I am willing to be from this place and identify with this group of people who live together on this island. And what I mean by everybody calling themselves Taiwanese is, just for instance, in the United States, there are immigrants who have come there who are not really wanting to become American per se. They, in a sense, they might set up for instance, in Iraq, when Saddam Hussein was in charge, there were Iraqis in the United States who, even while getting American citizenship, were really, in a sense, setting up a government in exile, and their ultimate goal was to be able to get rid of Saddam Hussein and go back to Iraq. And some of them have gotten to do that this past year. And what I mean when I say if people are willing to call themselves Taiwanese, it will be better for unity is if you have a mentality that you're in Taiwan as an exile and this is not your homeland and you one day hope to go back to some province in China, then in a sense your mentality, you're living in Taiwan as an exile, you're not committed to what's happening locally, you're just in a sense biding your time, and that can go on for generations with that kind of mindset. But I know even among the Waishenren, there are some who have that kind of exile mindset. But there are also many who, at this point, they're vested locally in what happens. They care about the environment in Taiwan and what happens to it. They care about the current political situation, and you'll have both Taiwanese and Waishenren who might have different political positions. They might say, you might have some Taiwanese even who say, one day it would be good once China is democratized to join with China in one nation. And some Waishenren who say it too, as opposed to those who just say, well, we should always maintain our independence from China. But they could still be both vested in Taiwan as their land and care about what's going on there, and in their own debate and working through things, compromise and chart the future of Taiwan. But that's different from having an exile mentality when you could care less what's going on in Taiwan. You're just trying to bide your time and keep yourself separate from the land you're living in until the day when you can get back to the other country. And I think people will be able to work together if they don't have that kind of exile mentality in Taiwan.
I think the important thing is it doesn't really matter if you're Waishen or Taiwanese. I mean, there are some Waishen who love Taiwan, and I've met people like that, and who love the Taiwanese people, and who are interested in truth and in the real Taiwan history, and who are interested in passing and teaching that. I know of Waishen who love Taiwan and who love the Taiwanese people and who are here for Taiwan, and that they're keen on preserving integrity and the reality of what's happened in Taiwan. And then there are Taiwanese people who would sell Taiwan at a heartbeat for any other. I mean, they could care less what happens to Taiwan. So I don't think it's really a matter of if you're Waishen or Taiwanese, but really where your heart is, and what are your are you interested in knowing what's true Taiwanese history, and if is this your homeland? I'm against the concept of forgive and forget. I mean, it's good to forgive and not have any lingering bitterness, but I really think it's important to remember. And lots of people have besides my own family, you know, my parents lost $2 and my dad lost his mom. There are people who are widowed, people who grew up without fathers due to what happened back in 228 incident. And throughout the years, there's just so many people have lost a lot. And it's not good to just forget that and just to bury that hurt, because that is there. But what's going to make it easier for the wounds to heal is for the offending party to come out and apologize for it and to say we did wrong. It would be, I think that's where unity is going to come. Once the truth is known and once people are saying, yes, we did wrong and we are sorry for it and we know that you hurt a lot in that, then healing can really take place, and then people can be on the same ground working towards a better Taiwan.